Bom dia a todos e todas. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos aqui ao PPGM. Hoje, recebendo a visita do professor Robert Gilmore Pontius Jr., da Clark University. Esse seminário ele está sendo coordenado pelo professor Washington Rocha, a quem eu agradeço aqui a organização desse seminário, com a composição aí de professor Ademírio de Barros, que está virtualmente conosco, quem eu agradeço também a presença e a mediação aí desse seminário. A Sultan, egresso aqui do nosso programa, representando a Geodatim, quem fará os comentários sobre esse seminário. Agradeço muito ao professor Robert Gilmore Pontius por estar aqui hoje na universidade e trazendo aqui para nossos estudantes uma oportunidade, né, única, né, de conhecer trabalhos, né, de relevância desenvolvidos pelo professor e, com isso, poder, né, ainda mais contribuir com a formação de vocês. Bom, então, o PPGM agradece a todos. Eu vou passar a presidência aqui, a fala para o professor Washington, né, quem é o organizador desse evento. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, William. Vou a máscara aqui para eu falar melhor. Bom, primeiro, cumprimentar aqui todos e todas que estão presentes aqui no auditório e que também estão nos acompanhando pelo canal YouTube tanto do PPGM, acredito que do MAP Biomas também. Então, essa transmissão está sendo feita amplamente aí para nossos parceiros. Para a Universidade Estadual de Feira de Santana, para o PPGM, é uma honra para nós a visita, a participação, né, do professor Pontius, né, que doravante eu vou chamá-lo de Gil, como ele prefere ser chamado, né? Podem também chamá-lo de Gil, ele adora essa forma de se referir a ele. Ele está entendendo, ele já entende bastante português. Eu não sei se Barros está nos ouvindo, e assim, a chance de fazermos esse encontro aqui do Gil com o professor Barros, né, e a participação do Sultan é bastante significativa para nós no PPGM. Primeiro, o professor Ademírio Barros, né, para quem não conhece, ele foi um dos fundadores aqui do nosso programa, né, junto com a equipe mais antiga aqui do PPGM, e Barros é também uma autoridade em SIG, né, não só no Brasil, mas de expressão mundial. E Barros, ele foi o tema de estudo, né, de Gil é um tema que muito preza ao Barros, né? Ele estudou a fundo. Inclusive, eu ia deixar para o Barros comunicar, mas como ele está offline nesse momento, eu vou antecipar, mas ele vai falar também. Após ter lido um dos trabalhos mais importantes do Gil, o artigo Death to Kappa.
Ele foi que matou o cálculo.
O Barros, ele escreveu, Barros write one paper, make another beauty of a kappa like this, a geographic inference, but he'll talk with you. Então, Barros, ele escreveu um artigo propondo uma alternativa ao kappa que tinha sido recém-assassinado pelo Gil. Ok? Então, assim, para nós é bastante significativo esse encontro, né, que nós estamos proporcionando aqui. E, evidentemente, a participação do Sultan, né, como alguém que tem um background em matemática. Na verdade, nós estamos hoje com 3 matemáticos na mesa, né? Sultan, Gil e Barros, né? Então, são 3 matemáticos, né, que estudam profundamente e aplicar o seu conhecimento matemático para os sistemas de informação geográficas especialmente para medir a qualidade e a acurácia dos mapas, né? Mas não esperem aqui de Gilmore algo assim determinante. Ele é questionador, né? Ele vai fazer muitas perguntas para vocês aqui durante... e, curiosamente, ele já detectou um trabalho aqui, um pôster no corredor, que ele viu que tem algo interessante, e ele já sequestrou esse pôster e vai incorporar na palestra dele, ok? Eu estou dando tempo aqui para ver se Barros... Eu estou sem...
Não, estou te ouvindo.
Ah, está me ouvindo? Ok. E aí, conseguiram reconectar Barros?
Ele está ouvindo.
Mas ele consegue falar? Bom, então, antes de passar para Barros, ele vai mediar o encontro, antes de passar para Barros fazer esse início, eu quero aqui expressar nossos agradecimentos, né, para Barros, para Solton e especialmente aí para o Gil, que se colocou à disposição de vir aqui em Feira de Santana, de vir aqui na Caatinga para compartilhar seu conhecimento e suas experiências, né? To share your knowledge and experience to our students, our researchers. Certo? Barro, você consegue falar? Ok. Aproveitando, vou fazer uma propaganda aqui. Em breve, assim, antes de fazer a propaganda, esse evento também, ele é um evento que está encerrando, né, fechando, eu diria aí com grande pompa, a disciplina que eu e Rodrigo conduzimos, né, de Sistema de Informação Geográfica. Então, essa é especificamente a última aula da disciplina, né? Tem vários, espero que todos estejam aqui ou estejam online assistindo. E a propaganda que eu vou fazer é que na próximo semestre, Barros e Solton vão estar junto aí numa disciplina Análise Quantitativa Espacial, e eu imagino que muitos de vocês vão fazer essa disciplina, ok? Então, fazendo a propaganda. Nada? Deixa eu ver o que é que eu invento aqui para falar mais. Fala sobre o quê?
O campo.
O campo. Ok. Hoje à tarde nós teremos uma oportunidade também de, na verdade, finalidade dupla, né? Nós faremos um curto trabalho de campo para a região de Morro do Chapéu, né? Onde nós pretendemos apresentar primeiro para o Gil, né, qual é a característica, afeições do bioma Caatinga. Vários estudantes, professores estão acompanhando, né, esse campo, e a gente vai ter a oportunidade lá de fazer alguma prática sobre como nós fazemos a validação de mapas, né? Então é basicamente isso, né? E assim como o Gil falou, ele quer que vocês vejam os mapas, eles são os modelos, né? E quando você chega no campo com o mapa, o que é que você encontra? Aquele ponto que você encontrou, ele corresponde ao que o mapa está dizendo, né? Então ele vai falar um pouco disso aí para vocês, e no campo a gente vai ter a oportunidade. Bom, Barros, eu gastei aqui toda a minha fala, agora é com você. Mas acho que ele consegue falar, não?
Vocês me ouvem? Vocês ouvem o dia? Alô, dia?
Ainda está falhando muito,
bom
Barros.
Dia. Alô, bom dia. Alô, bom dia.
Professor?
Eu estou escutando você muito bem, Diego. Eu escuto bem, Diego.
Pronto. Eu vou dar a orientação pelo WhatsApp para o senhor, ok?
Tá certo.
Ah, de frente isso.
That's okay, because I need enough light for the camera to see me. Okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Ok, a gente está tendo problemas da conexão com o professor Barros, então, para a gente não atrasar muito o evento, Barros,
Alô?
vê se...
Alô, bom
Estamos
dia.
ouvindo.
Bom dia.
Como?
Professor Barros,
Bom
nós
dia.
nos ouvimos,
Diga.
nós o ouvimos. Por favor. A fala está com o senhor, professor Barros.
Perfeito. Todo mundo me ouve? Bom dia.
Bom dia.
É um prazer muito grande estar aqui novamente na UF, mesmo virtualmente. Agradeço muito o convite. É uma honra estar participando aqui numa mesa de discussão de sistemas de informações geográficas e erros interpretados através da avaliação dos índices calculados mediante uma plataforma estatística ou de probabilidade ou uma plataforma de simplesmente cruzamento de dados ou de matrizes de confusão. Então, eu me sinto muito à vontade de estar aqui. E agora, para o professor Robert, I'm very glad to be here with you, Professor Robert. I know you. I read all your articles, in special the Death to Kappa. Inspired me formulate another index to validate maps. And I'm very glad to hear your oral presentation. Thank you.
Bom dia. Now in English. Good morning. Very good. Language is difficult. Even, I'm sure it's difficult between Portuguese. Some of you are native Spanish speakers. It's difficult to communicate between two native English speakers, as my work has shown. Even scientists who both speak English cannot communicate clearly. That's why people invented mathematics, to try to make the communication a little bit more straightforward. But some of us even find mathematics difficult. That's why humans invented pictures. So I will do my best today to present my ideas in terms of pictures, because I find that if I can present it as a picture, then it makes it clear in my mind, it can make it clear in other people's minds, and then I realize the idea actually makes sense. Many of the ideas that I have tried to explain in my classes when I teach, if I find an idea that I find is difficult to explain, years later I realize the reason it is difficult is because it makes no sense. So my approach to mathematics is I follow the same advice of a famous doctor, a surgeon, who said, if the operation is difficult, then it's because you are doing it wrong. So my goal in mathematics is to make it as easy to understand as possible, and so therefore it turns out to be more simple than what many other people are doing. So in the introductions, we've had many references to this Death to Kappa article. I will explain the ideas of that today and show how Kappa is making things more difficult and more complicated than necessary. The better solution is simpler, as my presentation will show. So who am I and why am I here? There are two questions. It was in 2001, Marco Milonas and I, Marco Milonas was one of my doctoral students at the time. We published this paper called Death to Kappa, but after the colon it says birth of quantity disagreement and allocation disagreement for accuracy assessment. I do not criticize unless I have something better to offer. So if I am going to kill Kappa, then I want to be able to offer something better. In 2008, I met a scientist from MapBiomas at a scientific conference in Washington, D.C., and he encouraged me to get involved with MapBiomas, and then I was very honored in 2020 to become a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee of MapBiomas. Let me have a question for you. How many of you have heard of MapBiomas? He's looking. The hands better be up. Okay. And then through MapBiomas, we got funding to have weekly Zoom meetings between me and my students in the United States and scientists from MapBiomas. We have been meeting almost weekly for about 2 years to talk about how to analyze the MapBiomas data. Just last month, my university hired a new professor, Gustavo Oliveira. Yes, he is from Brazil with a name like that. He is an expert in the international trade of soybeans between Brazil and China, and he is a political ecologist. And he and I have teamed up with Julia Shimbo, who is the scientific coordinator of MapBiomas, and we are asking the United States Space Agency for $750,000 to study irrigation as a strategy for adaptation to climate change in Bahia's Cerrado. And so some of that money can come to you because I am searching for doctoral students to come to the United States and pursue a doctorate at Clark University, my university, to study this land change in the Cerrado. And that will be over the next 3 years. And so I'm here this year. This year I am in Brazil for 1.5 months. And next year I will be here for 2.5 months with funding from the United States Fulbright Scholarship. So this might be the first you see of me, but it will not be the last. I plan to return. So here are my main points. I want to be very clear about this. Today, in about the next hour, 15 minutes, I will share how I develop these ideas for how I develop my philosophy on focusing on difference as opposed to agreement. I'll illustrate the points with examples from a Venn diagram. How many of you recognize that phrase, Venn diagram? Okay, you might not recognize the phrase, but when you see it, I bet you will recognize it. I have materials. Just this year, I published my first book, and I hope your library gets that. I have videos that my students have made, posted for free, that you can see. Most of the links are through YouTube. On my website here, and for all of the methods I talk about today, there is free software available for you to do this analysis. I frequently get the question, are the data from Map Biomass good? So I will answer that question by the end of this morning. And like I said, I'm looking for students to come do a doctoral degree at Clark. Well, this is the first part of a Venn diagram. Most of the methods, I am a mathematician. The thing that I create are new equations. And this is why I like working with applied scientists. It gives me a reason, a focus to derive the new equations. And most of my equations derive from what's called a Venn diagram. In a Venn diagram, one part, the outer part, the rectangle, that's the universe. Also, if you're doing mapping, that's the spatial extent. And then within the rectangle, we have a circle. That's one set. We will call that set blue. And we'll have another name for this set. I'm calling this the reference. We can think of this blue circle as the presence of your class in which you're interested. And this is the presence according to your best available information. The best available information we call the reference information. If you believe in truth, then you can call this truth. But in geography, sometimes truth is difficult to know. So the blue set is the presence of the class according to your best available information. Outside of the blue circle is absence of the class according to the best available information. The best available information may be what you see on the ground. Then, the next part of the Venn diagram, now we have another set, a red set. This represents the presence of the class according to your map. And if it's inside the red circle, it's presence. If it's outside the red circle, it's absence, according to the map. Okay? This is a Venn diagram, but some of you might not recognize it, because it did not look like the Venn diagram that I saw in middle school mathematics, and then in college, what was the Venn diagram that you saw? Maybe it was like the one I saw. I got very frustrated with it. The Venn diagram I saw had the two circles, but the circles were the same size. But my math teacher said, well, they might look the same size. But no, I'm just put down the microphone so I can use my hands. Okay, that's the microphone for YouTube? Or the people on YouTube cannot hear? Yeah. Okay.
You
but,
need to use the microphone all the time, okay?
Okay, oh, right. I don't put down the microphone, right. So sorry, YouTube people. I gotta apologize to the YouTube people. Okay, so what's Pontius's big new idea? His big new contribution to science is he draws one circle smaller than the other. And the message here is, if the circles are different sizes, then that's indicating one is smaller than the other. And then in my way of thinking, a quantity disagreement exists. That on the map is showing a smaller size of that class than how that class exists on the ground. And that's important. That's probably the first thing you want to know if you're looking for the errors in the map when you're mapping a class. So one question is the class on my map smaller or larger than the class on the ground? And if it's smaller or larger, then there's a quantity difference. Okay. So the Venn diagram has 4 parts. And some of you, I call these 4 parts, the intersection here, where the 2 sets intersect, I call that hits. I did not create that word. I got that word from other scientists, and I found these words extremely helpful. So this is why I'm using these words. If it is in the blue circle, but not in the red circle, I'm calling those misses. So those are, the category exists in truth, but the map missed it. A hit is the category exists in truth, and bam, your map hit it. Here, your map says, oh, the category is there, watch out, and you look and the category is not there. So that's a false alarm. And out here, this is if the part that's in neither of the circles is called correct rejections, okay, where your map rejects that the category exists and in truth, and your map is correct. Okay, so notice that what's correct are hits and correct rejections. In your classes and in the literature, you might see these referred to as false negatives, true positives, false positives, and true negatives. How many people recognize those terms? True positive, okay. Every time I hear those, I need to stop for about 10 seconds. Think, like, what are these? So you've had the same experience. Okay. This is why I use these other terms. Okay. Most of my ideas derive from this diagram. Oh, yeah. Let me set up the joke first. I once saw a presenter at a scientific conference in Mexico. He said, I am mapping a rare class, a rare crop, something very difficult to do, and his map is 93% correct, which he said with great pride. And he started presenting his statistics, and then I realized his Venn diagram looked like that. Where are all those 93% correct? Most of them are correct rejections. What? Here is the blue circle is his rare class, and the red circle is where he mapped it. So I'm like, yeah, it's, now I'm thinking maybe I should publish a paper entitled Death to Percent Correct, because percent correct can be remarkably misleading. So we really need to be careful about what metrics we use to measure these. And so I was thinking it would be more helpful if he reported the misses, hits, and false alarms. So what do we have up here? Let's see. The blue circle, if you it has the three parts: misses, hits, and false alarms. The misses are 5, the hits are 1 percentage point, and the false alarms are 2. If I know those three numbers, I know that the true size is 6, because the true size is the misses plus the hits. The mapped size is 3, because the mapped size is hits plus false alarms. The errors are the misses and the false alarms. 5 plus 2 is 7. When I look at the true size is 6 and the map size is 3, he's underestimating the quantity by 3. Okay? Because his map says that it's 3, but in truth it's 6. So that's a quantity error. He has the wrong size of the red circle. He's drawing the red circle too small. And when he draws the red circle, he does not draw it at the correct location. The red circle is not on top of the green. And so the fact that he's drawing it in the wrong allocation, that's contributing 2 to the 7, to the error of 7. Oh, I'm getting all lost here. Back. There we, right. So he's got a total error of 7, quantity error of 3, and an allocation error of 4. Okay, but he was judging himself by percent correct. So if he wants to maximize percent correct, I've got some advice for him. Just say there's nothing there. Just have no red circle. Map 0 of the class. And if you do that, then his percent correct increases to 95%. It's like that's a problem with trying to maximize percent correct and trying to use this one particular metric while not thinking clearly about exactly what that metric is measuring. Yep, if you have 0 red circle, you'll be 95% correct, but then misses are 5, hits are 0, false alarms are 0. Well, that's the good thing about predicting 0 size. You'll have 0 false alarms. But the total error is 5, and it's all quantity error. He underestimated the quantity. Okay, well, I'm not sure if that's the best way to go, just to try to maximize percent correct. Here's another way, another possible way to draw the red circle. We've got, let's see, here, notice here the two circles are the same size. So he's getting the size perfect. He's got the quantity perfect. So he got misses are 5, hits are 1. Now false alarms are 5. So his percent correct is actually going down from the previous slides, but the true size is 6 and the mapped size is 6. He has a total error of 10, but he's got 0 quantity error. And all of that error derives from the fact that the two circles are not on top of each other. Okay, now he's got to think, well, what's the purpose of the mapping? What is he going to put in his report? In his report, if the goal is to report only the size, well then, this map is perfect. It's got the perfect size. It does not have the perfect allocation, but it's got the perfect size. But there's other ways to draw that red circle. What about this? Do you think this is any better? At least now he's got the two circles right on top of each other. But now the red circle is larger. So what have we got? Now we have 0 misses. We have 6 hits and 3 false alarms. The true size is 6, but now the mapped size is 9. So the total error is 3 due to these false alarms, and it's all overestimation. He's making the size too large. And he's got, one circle's entirely inside the other one, so he's got 0 allocation error. So my question for you is, of all the ways to draw the red circle, what's best? I hear silence. It's a difficult question, but in some ways it's very easy to respond to that, because I hear that question a lot. Which is best? My answer, do you have a recommendation of what's best?
I don't know.
Okay. It's an impossible question to answer because the person who asked that question is not defining what they mean by best. So, right? So whenever I hear that question, and I hear that question a lot, I said, oh, I'll be happy to answer that question if you are willing to define what you mean by best. And it's the responsibility of the scientist to decide the definition of best, and then that will relate to a metric, and that metric must relate to the research question. So my advice is you must make your metric relate to the research question. And it's like, yeah, Pontius came here and he gave us that advice? Make your metric relate to your research question? Well, that's obvious. Any thinking scientist should do that. Yeah, but they don't. Many scientists just rely on traditional metrics without thinking exactly what that metric is telling us. You will not see those circular Venn diagrams in the literature. And you will not see these circular Venn diagrams on posters like this poster that I found in the hallway, which essentially has that same Venn diagram. You will not see the circular Venn diagrams, but you'll see something more like the rectangular Venn diagrams. Look, but when you see that Venn diagram, think, here's the same Venn diagram. But here, now the classes are rectangles. Here is the reference presence. Here is the reference, the mapped presence, and the intersection are the hits. But you will not see this in published research papers or on posters. What will you see? You will see this. How many of you have seen something like this in a journal article? Okay, or on a poster. Well, I'm going to change your life right now. So here's a poster I just found in the hallway right before this presentation. What have we got right down here in the lower left? We've got that exact same table. So here's the table. The rows are yes and no. The columns are yes and no. there's 4 numbers, and then there's the sums at the bottom and the sums to the right. Who are these people? They've dealt with right, these people have dealt with this exact same concept. Oh, and what they have over here, so here they have 4 numbers. Here they have those 4 numbers, and they take those 4 numbers, and they've reduced them to 1 number. And the number they selected is tau. Tau is a summary metric of those 4 numbers. Why they chose to select tau, I'm not quite certain, but that's one of many metrics that they could have selected. Okay, so then the question is, the next time you see Silva and Jesus, you must ask them what motivated them to select tau as opposed to many of the other metrics that are available. There you go. So here, I do not know what happened to here. Maybe I will do this, not that. Okay. I'll start out with the data and then in the table, and there is something that's failing on the graphics there, so we'll not look at the left side of the slide. So what do we have here? We have 10 observations. I'm a raster GIS guy, and so my observations tend to be in square pixels. So here, this variable is x, and this variable is y. Y is the reference, some people call that truth, and x is the diagnosis. You can think of x is what your map is showing. So if you look here, the diagnosis is P stands for presence. The diagnosis is presence, and truth is presence, and so that's a hit. What here, the diagnosis is presence. In truth, it's absence, and so we get 2 false alarms. Here, the diagnosis is absence, and there are 3 presence. So these 3 are missed. So these are 3 misses, and then here are 4 correct rejections. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 bits of information, and then the 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 4 is 7, 3 plus 7 is 10. And also down that you can add down here. Okay, so this table has 4 bits of information. And those are the 4 parts of the Venn diagram. You can go to Wikipedia. And on this Wikipedia page, it shows something like a Venn diagram. It shows this table, and it gives 20 metrics that summarize that table. 20. The table has 4 bits of information. Why do we need 20 metrics to summarize 4 bits of information? My advice is just give your audience those 4 bits of information and let the readers compute whatever the readers think is particularly helpful. But I think if you give the readers those 4 bits of information and you help the readers interpret those 4 bits of information, then the readers are going to learn much more than if you give them exactly 1 bit of information and the value like we have over here. Here we've got a tau of 0.52. Yeah, what am I supposed to do with that information? Tau is 0.52. What I want to know are the 4 bits of information in the particular table here. I think it's very easy to look at the table and to think that these are the 4 bits of information and that the sum of these adds to the outer marginal totals. That's the way I thought for about 15 years. But about 5 years ago, I realized I'm thinking about this table all wrong. I shouldn't think about starting from the inside out. I should think about starting from the outside in. Because that matches, one reason is because that matches the scientific process. When you're a scientist, what's the first thing you decide? What am I going to study? Meaning, how many observations am I going to get? Where is the number of observations? Right there. Okay, so this is the size of the spatial extent. Then, within that total, a subset of those are going to have presence in Y. So this 4 is a subset of that 10. So you can think of this is the size of the blue circle. Then you're going to make your red circle. Where is the size of the red circle? It's right there. Okay, so far I've just described 3 bits of information. The total, the abundance, and the size of diagnosed presence. And with those bits of information, well, you can fill in the 7 and the 6, but you cannot necessarily fill in those 4. You need one more bit of information in order to fill in all 4. So if you know the hits and these marginal totals, then you can fill in everything else. So those are still the 4 bits of information that can fill the entire table. 1, 2, 3, and the hits. I started thinking about the table of working from the outside in because in many situations, this diagnosis here this one is made in terms of presence and absence. But typically, there are some observations where you are very certain it's present, and there are some observations where you're guessing it's present. But here, with your diagnosis, the diagnosis is either presence or absence. And this diagnosis is not communicating the uncertainty or the certainty about the person making the diagnosis. So in many algorithms, machine learning algorithms, the output is not a presence-absence. The output is a number on a continuum. And frequently that continuum is between 0 and 1. So underlying this X diagnosis are actually continuous numbers, and those are portrayed on the next slide. Okay, so notice the Y truth is going to stay the same. What differs here is what's underlying here. Okay, so now we have numbers here. And there is, so Y is a binary variable. Now X is an index variable. It can range on a continuum. So it would be helpful to have a mathematical procedure that compares this continuous X variable to the binary truth variable. And there is a procedure, and that mathematical procedure is called the total operating characteristic. And the total operating characteristic considers many ways to convert this index variable to a presence-absence variable. And each method to convert the index variable to a presence-absence variable generates this table. So let me walk you through that procedure. If these 10 observations would be the output from perhaps a machine learning algorithm, then there are many ways to convert this index to a presence-absence variable by selecting thresholds. if I have a standard that says I will diagnose it as presence only if I am extremely confident. And my definition of confidence is that the index is greater than 95. So if that's my criterion for 95, well, none of these are at or greater than 95, so I'm going to diagnose absence every place. And if I diagnose absence every place, well, I'm going to get this one wrong, but I'm going to get those 2 correct, and I'm going to get those 4 correct. And if I diagnose absence every place, then this is going to be a 0. And then this will, misses will be 4 and correct rejections will be 6. And notice this never changes based on the diagnosis, and that never changes based on the diagnosis. And so for that diagnosis, I get a table like this, and I'm going to plot it in this space. So and this graphic shows the 4 bits of information. Where are those 4 bits of information? On this axis, horizontal axis, here's the 10. That 10's right there. This is the size of the extent. On the top of this axis, this 4, that's the size of abundance. The value along here, the value along this axis is the diagnosed size. And the value along this axis, well, it's labeled hits. That's the number of hits. And so notice the diagnosed size is hits plus false alarms. Hits plus false alarms. So if I diagnose 0 size, then I'm going to be right here. I'll have 0 hits. Then I can change the threshold. What if I lower the threshold down to 90? So the 90 will be a diagnosed presence, and then here I'm going to hit that. Bam, got a hit. Because the diagnosed size increased to 1, and I got a hit. So I'm going to be there when at a threshold of 90. If I lower the threshold down to 65, then I diagnose the 90 and the 65 as hits. But this second observation, it's a false alarm. So I'm going to move from here to here. If at a threshold of 50, I generate another false alarm. If I lower the threshold to 45, then I increase the size of the diagnosis and I generate another hit. And so I keep on going to lower the threshold to 40, to 30, and anything less than 10. When I lower the threshold down to 10, I'm diagnosing presence every place. So what these red triangles are, those derive from this table. And so this diagram is a way to summarize 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We generated 8 possible tables, and this graphic summarizes all 8. And so this is a really, really helpful technique. And if you do not know this technique, you will probably you'll probably reduce your analysis to this, where you're losing information about your uncertainty. Okay. Where is here? Okay, so this curve, and on the graphics, it's helpful to draw a line between all these triangles. This is known as the total operating characteristic. This is a journal article, a free journal article that you can get, and you can create this using this free software. My master's student created this software. It's the best software in the world to generate this total operating characteristic. Okay, how many of you have ever heard of this thing called the relative operating characteristic, also known as rock curves? Okay, good. Rock curves follow the similar logic, but in a much more complicated way. So you probably, even in your computer lab, probably in your statistical software, it has the ability to compute rock curves, but I think you're much better off with these total operating characteristic curves. Okay. Well, gosh, he's been going for almost an hour now, and he hasn't even spoken about kappa. Let's get into kappa. Kappa is also a summary metric of those four numbers: the hits, misses, false alarms, and correct rejections. So the following slides show problems with kappa. Kappa is an index that ranges between 0 and 1. Many scientists make an index that ranges between 0 and 1 because they think that we cannot understand things that don't range from 0 to 1. And they think we want indices where 1 means perfect and 0 has a particular interpretation, as it does with kappa. So 0 indicates that the agreement between your map and the reference map is equivalent to the agreement between a randomly allocated reference map and your map. Okay, well, so where negative values of kappa indicate less than random allocation agreement, given the quantity of presence in each variable. So Marco and I published this, and I was very confident about the ideas. Why? Because I had been thinking about them on a daily basis for about a decade. And I realized that some of my very first publications in 2000 actually endorsed the use of kappa. And so here I apologized for my previous publications, and I said, look, sorry, I've learned something. Now I have something better to offer. And so since, and I was so confident, I told my co-author, look, that's going to be the title. And he said, Gil, don't you think you're being a bit harsh? You know, you should try to be a little bit more polite. I'm like, no, Marco, I know this idea is good. We're going to state this because I knew people cite literature that they don't even read. And I wanted people to get the message even without reading the article. You get the message in the first three words. So let me give an illustration of kappa. I don't know if your teachers told you that we're going to have a test in this lecture. Yeah? They didn't tell you? It's coming up. Here we go. Quiz time. Quiz time. Right. Lock the door. Look, she is locking the door. Look at that. Oh, no, I scared one away. Well, there we go. She doesn't want to fail the test. Okay, here's the question. Does X1 or X2 agree more with Y? So here's Y, here's the truth. Here's one diagnosis. And again, A stands for absence, P stands for presence. And here's the alternative diagnosis. How many of you think that X1 agrees more with Y than X2? How many people for X1? There's always one person in the crowd, okay? How many people for X2? Only 2 people. And how many of you just don't care? No. I'm not trying to be tricky here, okay? Okay, tell us why you selected X1.
So, I think the X1
Yeah.
is more similar to diagram than I think. Or not.
Yeah, but why do you think X1 is more similar to Y than X2?
Yeah.
Yeah, but can you tell us why? And it's a sincere question. I mean, because I want to know what is the thought process here. Okay, maybe we can talk about it afterwards when we're having coffee. Okay, well, okay, so look, we have people in this room who do not agree by just looking at the data. Let's get quantitative about this. Maybe we need a metric. And I like thinking as little as possible. So I'm going to present to you the simplest, one of the simplest possible metrics, proportion correct. Okay? This, let's see. Oh, these two, the first two observations are correct. Everything else is wrong. So we got a proportion correct of 0.2. What about this? Oh, the first two are wrong, but, oh, everything else is correct. So we got 80% correct. Sorry. But.
I agree with you.
Oh, you do? It sounds like you agree with kappa. Look at kappa. Kappa's saying that X1 agrees more. It's like, what? Really? And the entire remote sensing community is using this thing like kappa? Yeah, and it's not just the remote sensing community. I've had medical doctors come to me and say, Pontius, I am concerned. Kappa is infecting my profession. Doctors go to medical conferences and other doctors are presenting kappa as a way to measure diagnosis. I've had scientists from other fields say that kappa is used in their field too, and they know the flaws, and it's a big problem. I mean, kappa's like a virus. It's as difficult to kill as coronavirus. You know, you think coronavirus is difficult. I'm trying to be here and change the behavior of scientists. Sometimes I have success, sometimes I have failure. But I think examples like this are, I hope you find it shocking. What's the logic here? The problem with kappa is that, well, if you look at these two, look at X2. Well, it has one red and that has one red. X2 has the quantity perfect. But kappa does not reward X2 for having a perfect quantity. X1, the quantity here is terrible, right? You got a quantity presence of 9. Here you got a presence of 1. X1 is dramatically overestimating the size. But kappa said, I'm not going to penalize you for that. Kappa says, I'm just concerned about relative to what your classification is relative to random allocation. So here, look, there's one yellow, and here there are 9 yellows. So you have, let's see, a 1 out of 9 chance of having that yellow on one of these yellows. No, you have a 9 out of 10 chance of putting that yellow on one of these yellows, and yes, that yellow was on one of these yellows. Okay, what about this? Here you only have one red presence, and you have a 1 out of 10 chance of having that, if you allocate these randomly, that red presence is going to be there. And you missed it. Okay, and so here, That's why kappa is negative here. And we get a positive kappa there. Okay? So I think there's many problems with kappa, and I think it starts out by asking the wrong question. It starts out by trying to measure agreement. I think it's much more helpful to focus on disagreement. So I find it much more helpful to think about the disagreement and why there's disagreement. Look at here. Here, you just got the wrong quantity. Here you've got 9 reds, and there you've only got 1. So that this overestimation of the size of the quantity, that accounts for the 8 pixels of disagreement. And then you've only got 2 hits. But what about this one? Look, you have the quantity perfect. The only problem with this here is you have a misallocation of these 2. So the allocation accounts for 2 pixels of disagreement, but you've got 8 hits. So I think if you focus on the disagreement and tell your audience if the disagreement is quantity or allocation, then it's much more helpful. So I regularly go to scientific conferences and go to poster sessions. And if I see kappa on a poster, I stop by and I talk to the scientist presenting that poster, and I ask an honest question. I ask, why did you use kappa? Simple, straightforward question. And it's remarkable if you approach with a smile and look friendly, I get remarkably honest answers. Answers like these. That's what people in my profession do. We use kappa. My advisor told me to use kappa. The software computes kappa. People expect kappa. Kappa measures accuracy. Well, accuracy is a broad concept, and Wikipedia gives 20 measures of accuracy. Why kappa? Kappa accounts for random agreement. That's a very popular misconception. It accounts for random allocation agreement, but not random quantity agreement. Here's one I got from a biomass scientist. I need to publish a paper to graduate while the journal's reviewers and editor insist that I include kappa even after I cite literature that describes the flaws of kappa. So we got big problems in the profession. The reviewers and the editors have very bad habits. You'd think I'd feel good. This Death to Kappa paper now has 1,600 citations. And I thought, maybe I'm feeling good about that. But then I start reading the papers that cite kappa, and they say, to do accuracy assessment, we used kappa. And they cite this Death to Kappa paper. It's like, what was the title too subtle? Should we have used stronger language? You missed the point. So the profession has big sociological problems among scientists, and they're problems about learning. And, why do people use kappa? Well, their professors told them to use kappa. Why do professors use kappa? Their professors told them to use kappa. And why did you go to university? Because you trusted the university system. But at some point, we need to say, if we're using the same methods we used 30 years ago, either we were correct, either we knew everything 30 years ago, or during the last 30 years, we've learned nothing. No, right. And so, if you change your mind in science, that's an indication you've learned something. I think that should be a natural part of the scientific process. Okay. And so the problems exist not only with kappa. Many other metrics have the same problem. When I've asked people, why they've used kappa. No one has ever told me, because kappa answers our research question. No one. You know, you'd hope that's the only answer you get. But the problems exist with kappa and other metrics. P-values are probably the worst case. Here's the p-value because it says whether or not my results are significant. And what exactly do you mean by significant? In science, significant means the p-value is less than the alpha level. And if you don't know exactly what that means, you should not be reporting p-values. If what you mean is large, the word you should use is large. If what you mean is important, the word you should use is important. Significant means something very special in statistics and does not mean large and does not mean important. Those are separate concepts. Okay? Nevertheless, there's really bad habits in the profession about how we communicate mathematics. Similar problems exist with very popular metrics, R squared, root mean squared error, F1 score. Many of these metrics compare the pattern in your data to randomness and test to see if randomness could explain those patterns. But I think that's just not even an interesting question. If you're dealing with maps, we know the patterns are not random. And in fact, if you're dealing with maps or landscapes, if the landscape really is random, then all of geography is wrong. We already know it's not random. Humans do not modify landscapes randomly. It takes too much effort. So to ask whether or not your patterns are different than random, it's just not even interesting. It's a very different question if you say, if you're making a diagnosis, is how much less than perfect your diagnosis is rather than how much better than random your diagnosis is. It's possible to make a diagnosis that's much more accurate than random and much worse than perfect. The more interesting question is how much worse than perfect it is. If you go to your doctor is making a diagnosis for you, are you going to feel good walking out of the doctor's office saying, yeah, my doctor can diagnose better than random? If your doctor's diagnose is as good as random, that means your doctor learned nothing in medical school. What you want to know is how much worse than perfect the diagnosis is. And that's a very different question. And there's straightforward metrics to measure that. So my main message here is to focus on the difference, not on the agreement. And I've given this example with a binary variable, a binary x and a binary y. I've given an example of a continuous index x and a binary y. The same principles apply when you have a continuous, when both x and y are continuous. I find it helpful to focus on the difference because if you're talking about diagnosis, that's the errors, and you learn from where you're going wrong. Kappa asks, well, yeah, you got it right, but you might have gotten it right due to randomness, and we can't let you get credit for that. Okay? If you got it right, the reason is you were trying to get it right. The question is, things that you got wrong, why did you get wrong? If you can understand that, then it can help your learning. The same principles apply if you're comparing two images of time 1 and time 2. The difference shows the change. Frequently, we're more interested in the change than we are in the persistence. If we have a continuous variable, also known as an interval variable, difference makes sense. I ask you this question. What's the difference between 3 and 1? Let's see. When I was 7 years old, we started learning subtraction. That mathematics applies. Some people want to measure the agreement. I ask you this question. What's the agreement between 1 and 3? It's like, what are you talking about? The question makes no sense in any language. Focus on the difference, and that's where the value of the learning will be. Okay, so here's now something I'm working on, inspired by Métodos. Métodos has a time series. Why? Because they are interested in the change, the difference through time. They have a time series where they diagnose the presence or absence of a category at each time point. But they have the time series because they want to measure change. So you can use the same Venn diagram to think about change. Here, the blue rectangle is the reference presence at an initial time, t minus 1. The green rectangle is the presence at time t. So with the differences here, this is the loss, and those are the gains. We have gross loss and gross gain. And here's the stable presence. If this rectangular Venn diagram shows the reference change, the true change on the ground, and Métodos is trying to measure that. So the Métodos scientists might, in order to map that pattern, they might map something like that. Well, they're not perfect, but first of all, we have to understand how this is portrayed. The red category is the initial presence. The yellow category is the final presence. So these two regions, I should add the word loss here, these are losses, these are gains, and they're stable presence. So now what I should do is overlay the reference presence with the mapped presence, and I should be able to compare how the true change on the ground occurs compared to how Métodos maps it. And I get something that qualifies for the Museum of Modern Art. We get 16 combinations. And that's getting a little bit too much for my brain. So I'm working right now to think about what to ignore. I think science really is the art of what to ignore. Métodos has so many pixels and so many time points. There's just too many patterns to consider. We're going to have to ignore some, and we want to ignore the least important patterns and focus on the most important patterns first. Understand the most important patterns, then we can worry about the details. Okay, but the concepts of, these are all those sets overlaid. So all the concepts of a Venn diagram are relevant. You could report the misses, hits, false alarms for each of the loss, presence, and gain. Here's something that Métodos, I've been thinking we really need to think carefully about, because I'm a bit concerned with Métodos that they're focusing so much on one metric to measure accuracy, percent correct. But it's possible to underestimate the size of a class at both time points, overestimate the gross loss, overestimate the gross gain, and perfectly estimate the net change. And if the goal is to estimate the net change, well, we shouldn't be worrying so much about some of these other metrics. Okay. But I think MapBiomas has many goals, and we have to have a metric for each one of those goals. Let's see. And so, like I said, there's so many patterns in the MapBiomas data. MapBiomas needs to give guidance to the users of what to focus on first, and then what to focus on later. And so on the very front page of MapBiomas, they have a time series, and some of these forest categories are decreasing, and these agricultural categories, farm categories are increasing. Is that helpful? Well, yeah, that's helpful. And that's probably the first thing I want to know. So I think that was a great idea about the first message. But if you look at these, yeah, we see a net decrease. But that net decrease is because we're having a gross loss, but we might also be having a gross gain of forest. Yep, humans can reduce forest, but then forest grows back. And so this line here, this line is not telling us about the gross loss and the gross gain. It's just, if it's decreasing, it's just telling us that there's more loss than there is gain. And so the students in the class that I'm teaching, they access the MapBiomas data, and they wrote computer code to analyze the gross changes of each of the biomes in terms of quantity disagreement and allocation disagreement. And so here's the output from some of my students. Here is for Amazonia, and each bar is a time interval, and each time interval is broken into a quantity change, and the rest of it's an allocation change. So a quantity change means some categories are having a net increase, other categories are having a net decrease. So in Amazonia, most of this quantity change is a forest loss and agriculture gain. But there's this allocation. And for change, you can think of an allocation change. That means you're having loss of a category at one place and a gain of category at the other place. So if you're losing forest here and gaining it over there, it's as if the forest is reallocating, but not changing the size. So what you see is, in some of these time intervals, more than half the change is allocation change. So if the only thing we're telling the audience is this, we're giving them less than half the story. Allocation change explains more than half of the changes. We also, like I said, my students made code to do this for all of the biomes. In Pampa, we have, exchange is part of an allocation difference. Exchange happens when in one part of the landscape, class A transitions to B, and another part of the landscape, B transitions to A. And so in the Pampa, these two categories are agriculture and grassland. So in Pampa, in some places, ag converts to grassland, in other places, grassland converts to ag. And so if you have the same size of both of those, then the sizes of the categories don't change, but their allocation does. Okay. But Pampa also has a quantity component. Overall, Pampa is losing grassland, so it has a quantity loss, and it's gaining agriculture. There is also something on these previous slides, there's something that I'll just mention briefly. There's something called a shift component. This shift component happens with a class when a particular class loses to one category but gains from another category. So over time, that particular category does not change in size, but it's because it's losing to one category and gaining from a different category. And so most of the shift in Pampa occurs when grassland loses to one category and gains from a different category. What?
Bom, primeiro eu queria agradecer a sua disposição, esses conteúdos aqui. Queria até pedir desculpa, porque como eu não falo inglês ainda, mas dá para perceber pelo conteúdo. Esses sistemas de mapeamento, de geomapeamento, quando eles classificam essas regiões, a vegetação dessa região, também existem outras ações que o sistema geográfico pode causar para interferir nessas condições da vegetação, para propiciar a agricultura nos espaços onde a incidência de chuva é mínima anualmente. Tem outras ações, vocês conseguem interferir também nos elementos climáticos que faz que a atmosfera, que faz que a chuva possa cair nos locais mais distantes. Tem tecnologia para isso? Como é que é? Essa curiosidade vem comigo e eu queria saber se...
We are going to have a brief translation.
Ele está só...
Você vai responder?
Vou responder a pergunta ao invés do professor, ok?
Tem que explorar para ele.
Ah,
I can try. He asked if when people mapping, like mapping biomas, if they consider some external interference by, for example, weather conditions, or you know what I mean.
I've had long conversations over years with scientists at Mapbiomas, and these are some of the most intelligent people I've interacted with, and they know lots about the data. So when my students and I looked at the data, there's some places where we saw big changes, and we're like, what happened there? Was there political changes or this?
Professor Barrow wanted to...
Oh, okay, to also... Okay, but...
Okay, I was waiting when Gil finished his presentation to open questions. I don't know if Gil finished his presentation. Then I can ask the people to formulate the questions, okay?
Very good. So give me probably 5 more minutes, and then we'll collect all the questions. But just to address the question while it's on my mind. Some of the largest changes that we've seen in a time series like that, the Mapbiomas scientists, when we see a particular year, we're thinking, oh, maybe there's something happening politically or, with a policy. They said, no, that's when NASA changed the sensor on the Landsat satellite. So you need to be really careful when you start to interpret these particular changes. So I get this question a lot. Well, Professor Pontius, are the Mapbiomas data good? And I've been thinking about that. And like I said before, I need a definition of good before I can answer that. And so here are 10 criteria to consider good. Do the variables relate to research questions that are important? Well, Mapbiomas is examining land change in South America. I mean, that's pretty important. It's globally important. It's globally important for the entire global climate. It's important for biodiversity. It's important for all sorts of things. So yes, they're important. Are the numbers free of political bias? As far as I've seen so far, yes, they do not have political bias. Does that mean map biomass is completely out of politics? I think no. How do they express their politics? The selection of the variables that they study. Okay? Land change is a very important variable. We are studying it because people make decisions about that. If map biomass had nothing to do with politics, that would mean that they're doing something that's not important. They're doing something that's important. But are they being politically biased in the results? I have not seen that. I think the answer is no. If they were, I would not be involved. Are the data well documented? You know, I'm thinking of the other data that I've tried to use, where I ask someone for data and they send me an Excel file full of numbers that have no variable names. Okay? Can users analyze the data without downloading them to a hard drive? This is the way my life has changed just within the last few years. In the past, I wanted the data on my hard drive. Now I do not want the data on my hard drive. The data are just too large. But I want to be able to analyze them. Are the data updated regularly? Are the creators of the data responsive to user needs? Can you communicate with the creators, and do the creators get back to you? Are the creators of the data experts in the landscape? Do the data have a platform that allows users to visualize the results? Does the platform allow useful analysis? And are the suspected errors well documented? Notice, with those criteria, none of those are asking, are the data accurate? That doesn't even make the top 10 list of my definition of good. And if you look at how, at least in my experience with map biomass, how I've done the assessment, bam, there's the answers. It's yes right down the line until, well, number 9, does the platform allow useful analysis? I think mostly, but one reason I'm so happy to be involved in map biomass is because I think I have something to offer. Are the suspected errors well documented? Well, somewhat. You know, I see summary metrics of % correct. I would be happier with summary. But actually, I have seen map biomass data with summaries of quantity disagreement and allocation disagreement. I was very happy about that. And notice I said suspected errors. We don't know if we have errors. If we knew exactly what the errors were, we would eliminate them. We try to understand the errors and at least communicate the errors. Okay? And so at least if you communicate to your users what you think the errors are, then that will be helpful information. Okay, to wrap up here, if some of you are working on a journal article and you want to submit it soon, please submit it to the journal Land, where my colleague and I are special guest editors. You can see videos on these topics at my website. And here's my brand new book, came out just this year, has many of the ideas that I've talked about in the presentation today, and also has software and an Excel file that comes with it. So again here, for the last slide, I'll summarize my main points. What I've aimed to do today is to share this philosophy of how I've developed my focus on difference. I illustrated the concepts with a Venn diagram. Remember that Venn diagram to help remember these. My book is available, videos, we've got software for all the mathematical techniques. In my conclusion, the map data, the Mapiomas data are certainly good enough to convince me to come to Brazil and join the team and help out and come back hopefully for many years. And please keep in mind, if you know of anyone who's interested in doing a doctorate in geography in the United States while studying land change in Brazil, please let them know. Obrigado.
Barros, você quer conduzir aí? Está fechado o seu áudio, eu acho.
Não, meu áudio está aberto.
Pronto,
Aqui.
agora.
Thank you very much, Gil. As usual, very inspiring talk. And I have a few questions, but first I have to say that using the diagram is very useful. And see the explanation with Boolean-ciarity. So without equations, I can see you solve the problem of analyze the quality of map or to validate maps. And kappa really is dead. Mostly because the error caused by marginal proportions. But solving the problem of validating maps, I have few questions, if possible. First is about ground control points. How many ground control points can be found? Second, the distribution ground points. Of the questions, the area of interest could be fragmented, could be continuous. Shapes are quite variable, so it's a problem. And I have to say that my index I created also focus on difference rather than agreement. And I would like to say that if can send the article I wrote to you for your critique. So that's my questions.
Okay, very good. Those are very important questions. And so this is, in fact, the second time this week I've had this question about the number of sample points to get the reference data and the distribution of those sample points. So this is a very important question, and I have another research project in the United States where we're doing the exact same thing. And we went through an exercise to determine how many sample points to get and how to select those from the landscape. Well, let me first start by saying at my university where I did my master's degree in applied statistics, they had an entire course about sampling. So it is a very sophisticated art. In my first job after my master's degree, I was working for the United States Federal Department of Agriculture. And the entire bureau was designing the sample. So there are many, many things to consider in the number of points and the distribution of those points. And I've given lots of advice on this, but there's lots to say, but I'll say just the most important things. It's important to think that sampling takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. You're going to have to train the staff to look at the maps and to identify these classes. And it's very difficult to do. Even if you're standing on the ground in the landscape, it's difficult to do. And so it's gonna cost time and money and energy. And so you want to make sure when you ask someone to look at a point, they are getting the most helpful information possible. So therefore, you should be asking them to look at points that where the map is most uncertain. It's not particularly helpful if they're always looking in the middle of lakes or in the middle of an urban place that's all completely paved, or in the middle of a forest. You're not going to learn anything there. The classifiers probably classifies those correctly very easily. So you want to make a stratification such that you break up the landscape into some places that you're very uncertain and other places where you are certain. And then you concentrate most of your observations in the places that are uncertain. And so what I've seen in Mapiomas with their strata, part of the stratification is based on elevation, where you have the flat places and the steep places. And Mapiomas concentrates the observations in the steep places. I think that's very intelligent. Why? Because in remote sensing, many of those errors are on the steep places because you have complicated things like shadows. And so that is something about the sampling design. What many people make a mistake when they summarize those data is they fail to account for the sampling design when they analyze the matrix. But I've not seen that mistake in Mapiomas. I think they're doing a great job as far as I can tell so far. As far as the sample size, your sample size is going to depend on how precise you want to measure which metric. And there's like a standard formula in sampling books that measure like the proportion. So if you're measuring the proportion of Brazil, that's a particular category. You can get an equation that will tell you the sample size necessary to estimate that metric to within a certain width of the confidence interval. And the more observations, the smaller your confidence interval will be. But what you need to think of is what metric do you want to actually measure with that confidence interval? Many people measure with that confidence interval the percent correct, but maybe that's not a very helpful metric to measure. So, but what I do know is the more samples you take, you're going to start to get, diminishing returns. You're going to start to learn less and less and less within each sample. But I guess my best piece of advice is hire a professional statistician who took that graduate level class in a statistics program. And additional questions. So one was about the sampling. Remind me what the other questions were about.
About the shape of
oh, yes, the shapes. Okay.
You have regular, irregular.
Yes. And so
fragmented.
Right,
continuous.
exactly. So the sampling design usually samples points, but points do not give complete coverage. But if you have a map of complete coverage, you can even see more details about the patterns, such as the number of patches, the shapes of the patches, and how those patches change through time. And so the sampling metrics are not measuring that because the sampling metrics do not have complete coverage, which your maps have. So with your maps, at each time point, you can compute spatial metrics, such as the number of patches, or the other metrics that FragStats produces. Who has heard of the software FragStats? Nobody. Okay, maybe. Okay,
Yes,
so
FragStats, yeah.
So FragStats,
FragStats,
will take a map from a single time point and compute the patterns in it for any class. So it can compute the number of patches. It can compute the average perimeter to area ratio for all the patches.
Yeah.
But there's a major, and there's other software that does this. But my students and I right now are working on a new method that will do much better. And because there's a basic problem with FragStats and other packages. When you have a time series, those packages will compute the number of patches at each individual time point. And so you'll be able to make a graphic of the number of patches for each class, and you'll end up with a graphic just like what we had on slide 28, where maybe the number of patches decrease or increase. But the FragStats does not show how the patches change through time, and that this decrease is due to a simultaneous loss and gain. So there can be two reasons why the number of patches can increase. You can either have patches splitting, or you can have new patches appearing, and both will cause an increase in number of patches. And there's two reasons that you can have a decrease in number of patches. You can have the patches disappearing through a loss, or you can have patches merging. And so my students and I have just worked out the mathematical concepts to do this, and my student has just finished the program in GIS, and we hope to have that software for you by the end of the year. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Gil.
I'm trying to serve as best
Gil.
as I can. Is the end of the year soon enough?
Okay, Gil, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I send you my article very soon.
Okay, very good. I will be extremely interested.
Okay, so open questions, please.
Agora a vez de vocês. Use o microfone.
Okay, I have two questions from Rodrigo Vasconcelos. He is a professor here, and he is also a collaborator at Mapbiomas Science, the first collection. He has two questions associated with land use and land cover scenario models. He said that in order to carry out some analysis with the scenarios of land use and land cover change, we need to have good maps in this sense. Good maps.
Good. There it is. That word again. Okay.
Yes, he hasn't explained what is good.
Right.
The definition. What is the golden rule to having a good assessment on the accuracy of map? Oh, I'm sorry, Rodrigo.
Okay. Well, okay, but he said good on the accuracy. But, notice I anticipated his question, because I've been getting that question a lot. So notice that almost nowhere on here is mentioned accuracy. But you need to have all these other things to make the data really useful. And the good thing is that administrators can have direct control over these things. Administrators can control directly the accessibility. Administrators cannot control directly the errors. Okay? But things like if you open up the data to other people, then they can tell you about the errors. And so that's one way to address it. Okay, but let me also address the question about what type of accuracy or what type of errors you should focus on if you're interested in scenario modeling. The important thing is to have metrics that tell you something about the change. here we go. With what I've thank you. With what I've seen on the map biomass results, they're giving metrics at individual time points. And that doesn't tell me about how accurately the maps portray change. And so I'll give you, oh yeah, I can illustrate it with this. Okay. Here we have agriculture increasing. I guess this is also telling me about the size. But if the only thing I'm interested in is agriculture increasing, what if my maps overestimate the size of agriculture at all time points? Then this entire line, it just gets shifted up. And if the entire line is just shifted up, the line, it still shows the same net change. And so it's possible that your maps might be really wrong in some respects, but correct in the respects that you're interested in. So you really, if you're going to make scenarios of change, then you need metrics concerning the change. And so this brings up a mistake I see repeatedly in the literature. And it follows this script that I've seen in the literature. We got Landsat data for 2 time points. We did the classification. At both of those time points, the maps are more than 85% correct. So they're good for any analysis. So we take those 2 time points, overlay the maps, we see the temporal difference. There's difference on 5% of the landscape. We assume all that difference is change, and we put it into some fancy machine learning algorithm to learn that 5%. It's like, really? If at both time points your maps are 85% correct, then that means at both time points your maps are 15% wrong. You're going to overlay those and see 5% difference and assume that difference is true change? It's crazy. What you really need are metrics that measure the change. Okay, so I don't know if he can respond, if that answers his question, or if I think he had a second question.
Actually, I think there are 3 questions
here. 3
here.
questions.
He said 2 because they are 2 related to land use, land cover. And the second question related to this topic is, what is the balance of using random and stratified samples when designing this assessment?
Okay, what?
Okay, sorry. What is the balance of using random and stratified samples when designing this assessment?
Yes, you're right. Well, this term stratified sampling is maybe a shortcut name for stratified random sampling. So the stratification part is where you take your entire region and you separate it into subregions, and each subregion is a stratum, and then you do random sampling within each region. And if you do not have strata, then you sample randomly across the entire region. And if you sample randomly across the entirety of Brazil, I mean, look at Brazil. What, maybe a third of Brazil is dense forest? You're going to be asking your hardworking enumerators to be looking at points in the dense Amazon and saying, what category do you think it is? Right? You're not going to be learning anything there. Okay, so you should put, right, you should put strata where you have a much more uncertainty, so you can focus your sampling there.
Okay, and the last question is about the use of machine learning, in
Oh,
particular
God.
neural networks,
Yes.
to simulate future scenarios with
Oh,
the
my
use of
God.
supervector machine. He said that this has gained space in the in the articles, I can say that word.
In the literature?
Yes.
In the literature.
What balance do you make between the use of these techniques, more specific weight of evidence,
Oh,
logistic
my God.
regression,
Oh, my
supervector machine? Greetings and thank you.
Okay, I have lots to say on that topic. Okay, but if they ask for literature, I was involved in an exercise that compared 13 cases of land change simulation modeling. And we published one article in 2008 and then a book chapter in 2018. And I think I have that citation on one of these slides. At least I can, yep, it's right here. Here, here's this citation here. So I recommend that the person read this. And because it summarizes what this group of 20 scientists learned when we were comparing these 18 case studies. So I think the person asking the question is completely correct, that it's now extremely popular to get maps from 2 time points, overlay them, assume that the temporal differences change, put that change into a machine learning algorithm with additional variables, and what comes out of that is a suitability map, and then to use that suitability map for extrapolation into the future. In fact, I teach a course every fall on exactly this topic, and I am extremely suspicious of such approaches. In fact, my philosophy is very similar to this philosophy that I presented concerning are the map biomass data good. People frequently ask me, what is a good model, or what model do I recommend? And I don't recommend any particular algorithm or any particular model, but I have 4 criteria of the definition of a good simulation model. 1, can you understand it? And if you cannot understand it, it's not necessarily your fault. Most models I know have documentation that's so terrible, it's impossible to understand. And so if you can't understand it, you should not be using it. And that immediately limits the number of models available. So 1 is, can you understand it? 2nd, can your audience understand it? In my mind, the purpose of a model that simulates future change is it's a political process. You're creating this extrapolation because you want to influence policy somehow. And in order to do that, you have to enable discussion. So in my way of thinking, a model is good. One definition of good is it helps people have discussions. I don't know of any metric for that, but it's certainly not any metric that machine learning algorithms produce. And so in order to improve a discussion, other people need to understand it. So that's my 2nd criterion. Can other people understand the model? I don't know many non-experts who can understand weights of evidence or the multi-layer perceptron or random forest. And by the way, we're not talking about trees here. We're talking about, some computer learning algorithm thing. I work with people who design algorithms for machine learning, and quite famous people. And even they criticize machine learning algorithms. They say, yeah, the machine learns, but I don't learn. It's like, well, what good is that? Okay, so can you understand it? Can your audience understand it? Can you control the model? Okay, I've had models where I want one knob to control the quantity and another knob to control the allocation. It's very helpful if those two are separate, because I might say, okay, I want to make a scenario where future change is near the previous change, and then make another scenario where it has the same allocation but just larger quantity. Okay, so it's helpful to have parameters that control those separately. I've worked with models where I've been telling my students, okay, here's how we want to set the allocation. Now make two outputs, one with a smaller quantity, one with a larger quantity. And they come back and say, well, I changed one thing, but it automatically changed something else in ways I could not control. So there are models that I think are just impossible to control. And in some ways, it's because of the way the algorithm is designed, and you don't have control over the algorithm, and it's not even in the documentation that it will give you some unpredictable results. And so that's my third criterion. Can you control the model? My fourth criterion is the model relevant to your research question. And so notice those four questions have nothing to do with accuracy, have nothing to do with quantitative metrics. Just like my criteria for are the map biomass data good are not measured by accuracy criteria. There's other more important things that if you cannot understand it, I don't care how accurate it is. If you don't know why it's accurate, then what good is it? Okay, but I have been, this entire summer, I've been working with people, meeting with them every Friday, and we've been working on the criteria to approve simulation models for RED projects. When I say RED, these are projects to reduce emissions due to deforestation and forest degradation. And there's many machine learning algorithms that will look at the change during a particular time interval and extrapolate it. And then people ask, are they good? I say, I need a baseline for good. And my baseline, I just want it to be easy to understand. And I don't even need to have it, if you beat the baseline, you don't have to say it's good. You can just say it's more accurate than the baseline. So my baseline is the 5-second model. And the 5-second model is what you would predict if you had 5 seconds to think about it. And so here is the initial time for, here's in 1971 for my hometown of Massachusetts. Red is urban, green is non-urban. And I want to make a prediction about what will change in the future. And I'm going to give you 5 seconds to think about it. If I think about it for 5 seconds, I think, well, there's going to be a gain of urban, and it's going to be allocated near the previous urban. Okay, so a default baseline model is that you predict that the gain of urban will happen near the existing urban. In nearly every example that my colleagues and I have looked at this summer, that 5-second model that's easy to understand is more accurate than models that we've seen from machine learning algorithms. machine learning algorithm can learn the details of a particular time interval, but if those details don't continue into the future, they have no predictive power. Okay, and was that are there other questions? I think I got those.
Ela quer perguntar? Não, deixa ele por último.
It's not a question. I wrote my commentary here. I'm glad to stay here today and to know and hear you. Your presentation was very useful for us students, and it will make we think a lot about the quality and validation of our maps. And I'm at the end of my master's. I'm working on, like I said you earlier, I'm working on water quality in a large reservoir named Pedra do Cavalo. Now I'm applying to a PhD, and I'd like to focus on mapping, monitor water bodies in terms of quantity and quality to identify the change. And if you agree, I will send you an email to discuss better my research interest. And I can send you my resume, my transcripts, and all of documents. I have the documents in English because I'm applying to a PhD in Australia here now.
Very good. I will promise that, well, I promise that I'm interested. I will promise that I will try to respond promptly, but I get buried by email, but email is the best way to communicate with me. I'm an email type of person, except when I'm in Brazil. They taught me Brazilians communicate by WhatsApp, so that's what I do when I'm in Brazil. But yeah, send me email. I'd be interested in your manuscript. I will try to respond, but like I said, I don't know how long it will take. If you don't hear from me back in 3 weeks, pester me again. Okay, do you use the Nash-Sutcliffe index? Do you know that Nash-Sutcliffe, Nash-Sutcliffe index?
Sorry, can you speak slowly and repeat, please?
There is an index that's very popular in hydrology. The name of the index is Nash-Sutcliffe.
No, I don't know.
Okay. Many hydrologists have used this index, and it just has the same problems as everything else. They're trying to make some index where they're trying to have an index where 1 means perfect agreement, and that's the problem, and they're comparing to randomness, and it's just an absolute mess. But all hydrologists use it, out of bad habit.
Yes, I will read about this index.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
We know the last IMAP idiomas, reference points are analyzed in an annual Landsat mosaic. But
here we go. Yes.
But in some occasion, it is difficult to identify the really class cover. Sometimes the specialist must research another Landsat image to solve this problem. Do you think that this point should be discarded or sorted again, or would be appropriate to search a higher resolution image?
Yeah, okay. This is remarkably helpful. I'm really glad someone asked this question. I think if you train people, you ask them to look at the point. If they say, I don't know, it's difficult to tell, they're giving you really important information. And you should document that. And so even in my research group, we're doing the exact same thing. We have a stratified random point design, and I'm asking my students to say, look at that point, give your best guess at the class, but also give a metric to say how certain you are. And I just have a 1 means they're certain, 0 means they're uncertain. Because at the end of the analysis, I want to know what % of my landscape was uncertain when people looked at it. And, you know, it could be half. You know, and then if you know that, you know, the people who are making the reference data are uncertain, if they're just guessing, then that helps you interpret when you see some metric about the difference between your reference data and the map. You shouldn't call it error because, you know, it's difference, but maybe the people creating the reference data were just guessing. Maybe they're like, well, I don't know, we can't agree. And that's important to know. And so I want to say, don't throw data out, but document it, and then have that be part of the discussion about how to improve. So in many research papers, I'll see flow diagrams of how people do a classification. You know, they have their raw data in the upper left, and then it goes into some machine learning algorithm, and then something magical happens, and then they compare it with the reference data, and then the last thing they do is accuracy assessment. And almost always they get % correct just above 85%. And then they go and publish that. I mean, it's just the flaw in that is that their research ends with that metric of accuracy. I think at the lower left, you should have a measurement of error, and then you learn something from those errors, and then it should feed back into how to revise the classification. And so it's really important to know how uncertain the reference data are. Because if most of your reference points are uncertain, maybe I don't see how you would change the automated classifier, because you don't want to necessarily make the classifier match the uncertain data. And so I think we need to even think more deeply about the reference data. But there's valuable information when the people creating the reference data say that they're uncertain. And I think we should be analyzing those places more. Yeah, maybe we could get different images, but then that's a problem too, because you had a particular image that you used for the classification. If you use a different image for the reference information, I mean, that's relevant to a different raw information. And even you can have 2 images from just 2 consecutive days. But if it's not at the same time of day, the shadows are going one way in one map and the shadows going the other way in the other map, and you can get all sorts of other additional problems. Yeah. Okay, so the most dangerous thing is to connect your personal ego with your accuracy metric. Because as soon as you do that, your metric is a reflection of your own psychological insecurities. It's not a reflection of the data. So we should not value our work necessarily by high metrics of accuracy. We should understand the disagreements and then try to understand why we're having those disagreements, and then figure out what to do next.
Thank you very much.
Tem mais alguma? A gente só, o professor Pontius, ele tem um compromisso a meio-dia, então a gente abre aí só para mais uma pergunta, alguém? Enquanto vocês pensam aí, eu só vou fazer um comentário, né? After you publish your paper in 2011, the famous paper, the viral paper, I think a lot of people are following and searching for you. So I suggest one movie title for this. Kill Gil.
Well, this other question.
Question. In deep learning, some metrics, oh my God, here we go. In deep learning, some metrics are applied for algorithms validation, such as recall, F1 score. How do you consider exchange and allocation metrics being used for convolutional models that use patches and not pixels? Holy, there's a lot of issues in that question. Let me address them as I see them in the question. Okay, I am not an expert in deep learning or in artificial intelligence, but I see that those methods used frequently in my field. And I have lots of colleagues who use those methods. And in the software packages in my classes, they have some artificial, some machine learning algorithms. My experience is for 20 years, I've been trying to understand what these things are doing. And my experience is when I ask the people using those methods some very direct questions, I cannot get straight answers from them. So I have asked many people, people who use machine learning algorithms regularly in their profession. I say, what do you use to assess the accuracy? They say an F1 score. I say, why the F1 score? They say, that's what people in our profession do. I said, oh, it's been a while since I've looked at the mathematics. What's the definition of the F1 score? I don't know, they say. So, and so this comes back to the criterion. What model should you use? You should use it only if you understand it. Okay, but when I've dug into machine learning algorithms, I've seen profound problems that other journal articles have not discussed with the algorithms I've used. So that's my concern about the validation of them. That if you don't, we have seen examples here that you will create remarkably different maps depending if you're trying to maximize percent correct or maximize kappa or maximize something else. So your selection of the score, your selection of the metric of evaluation is extremely important. And if you do not know the mathematical behavior of that metric, you can end up producing a map that you don't even know why the software is doing what it's doing. How do you consider exchange and allocation metrics being used for like a convolutional neural network? I have never seen quantity, exchange, and shift used for machine learning algorithms. I'd be delighted to see that.
To test.
What's that?
It's good idea.
Yeah, that's a wonderful research. And the last part of the question, some models use patches, not pixels. Yes, and there are even software packages that when they make a classification, they will use object-based image analysis. So they will classify patches, collections of pixels, rather than classify individual pixels. And so then the question is how to assess the errors in such a map. And my students and I have reviewed 200 journal articles that have reported accuracy assessment for these patch-based maps for object-based image analysis, and many journal articles have claimed various levels of accuracy, but I know of no good way to compare two maps of patches of polygons. Some people will say, oh, so we could have one map. I can write on this?
Yes, yes.
No.
Okay.
Let's say you have one map that makes patches like this. This is the blue map. There's your reference patches. And then the map that comes out of eCognition. eCognition is a popular object-based image analysis package. What if your map makes patches that look like this? How do you compare those? I mean, I've seen some procedures that say, well, we make pairs between each blue patch and each red patch. Like what? But if the number of blue patches is different than the number of red patches, you can't make a one-to-one pairing. So I think there's confusion about that, and I don't know of any clear way to go about doing that.
That's okay. Very good. Thank you, Prof.
Barros, você quer fazer as considerações finais?
I hope you come here many times to discuss these questions with us, because are very important questions. And I hope also in the future get in touch with you to discuss not validating maps, but choose ground control points and to decide how many fragmented patches can be addressed to validate the maps. Thank you very much.
It's been my tremendous pleasure to be here. It's so wonderful to see the level of interest. I know in spite of challenging language things, language challenges, you've stuck with us, and I'm just so delighted. During my time here, I've been so delighted to see the Brazilian scientists really realize that they can use what I have to offer. And so the best reward in my career is to see other people use these ideas that I have. So thank you very much for your interest and your collaboration. Obrigado.
Bom, nós aqui agradecemos. We thank you very much for your speaker. Nós agradecemos muito a Gil. E eu queria aproveitar, antes de finalizar, também para estender os agradecimentos ao MAP Biomas, né, e à Fulbright, né, Foundation, que proporcionou, né, a vinda de Gil ao Brasil, né, from your trip to Brazil, e MAP Biomas, que compartilhou, com as universidades integrantes da rede a possibilidade desse contato. Okay? Então, agradecemos e também a vocês aí pela assistência, pelo permanecer e pelas perguntas, e uma boa tarde para todos.